Right. Gather round, everyone, because the Chancellor of the Exchequer is in what we might politely call a spot of bother. Rachel Reeves is facing calls for her resignation after an online petition demanding an independent investigation into her pre-budget claims has rocketed past 44,000 verified signatures. And here's the kicker. People reckon she might have been playing fast and loose with the truth about Britain's finances. I know, shocking stuff. A politician potentially not being entirely truthful? Whatever next, discovering water is wet. Quick favor, if you're loving this, hit that subscribe button. Over 94% of viewers haven't yet. It's free, takes a second, and means the world to us. Thanks if you did. Now back to the show. So let us paint a picture, shall we? On November 28, someone decided they had it quite enough and launched a change.org petition that essentially accuses a chancellor of misleading the public about the state of the UK's finances. Not ideal, is it? Imagine telling your mates you are completely skint to get out of buying a round, then they spot you pulling out a wad of 20s at the cash pound. That is roughly the vibe we are dealing with here, except instead of a round of pints, we are talking about £40 billion in tax rises. Slight difference in scale, admittedly. The petition claims that Reeves portrayed Britain's financial situation as absolutely dire, describing it as being in a negative state, to justify imposing what they call stringent financial measures from 2025 onwards. You know, the kind of measures that make everyone clutch their wallets a bit tighter and contemplate whether they really need to eat 3 meals a day. But here's where it gets properly interesting. Reports suggest the Office of Budget Responsibility, the OBR for those who enjoy acronyms, had actually informed her that things were not quite as apocalyptic as she was making out. Awkward. Now, before we go any further, let us talk about what this petition actually means in practical terms. Because whilst 44,000 signatures sounds rather impressive, and it is certainly nothing to sniff at, a petition on change.org carries about as much legal weight as a chocolate teapot. It cannot compel the government to do anything. It cannot trigger a parliamentary debate. It is essentially the digital equivalent of shouting into the void, albeit a void where 44,000 people are shouting along with you. If you want actual parliamentary action, you need to get an official parliamentary petition going, which requires 10,000 signatures for a government response and 100,000 for potential debate consideration. This change.org effort? It is more of a very loud suggestion. But here's the thing about very loud suggestions. They can still be rather embarrassing for the person on the receiving end. And Rachel Reeves is certainly feeling the heat. The petition's organizer, a chap named Graham Lumsden, has been rather direct about his expectations. He states that it is imperative the Chancellor is accountable to the UK people for her conduct and the decisions she makes regarding our finances. He goes on to say what every taxpayer expects: transparency, honesty, and integrity from our elected officials. Revolutionary concepts. Truly, who would have thought we might want the people managing our money to be honest about it? Now let us rewind a bit and examine how we arrived at this particular pickle. Cast your mind back to October 30th, 2024, when Rachel Reeves delivered her autumn budget. This was not your garden variety budget. Mind you, this was a £40 billion tax-raising spectacular that included increases to employers' national insurance and capital gains tax. £40 billion. That is not pocket change. That is not even sofa cushion money. That is the kind of figure that makes your eyes water and your bank account weep. And what was the justification for this eye-watering sum? Well, according to Reeves, there was a £22 billion black hole in public finances left by the previous government. A black hole so massive, apparently, that it required immediate and dramatic action. Now, I am no astrophysicist, but I do know that black holes are meant to be these terrifying cosmic phenomena that suck everything in and destroy it. Quite the metaphor for public finances, when you think about it, though perhaps a bit dramatic for what might have been a slightly more manageable gap in the accounts. Here's where the plot thickens like undercooked custard. The OBR, those lovely number-crunching folks whose job it is to keep everyone honest about the state of the economy, had apparently been sending some rather different messages to the Chancellor before the budget. On September 17th, they informed Reeves that the fiscal shortfall was actually smaller than expected. Interesting. Then, in October, they delivered the pièce de résistance. The gap had been eliminated altogether. Poof! Gone. Like a magic trick, except with spreadsheets instead of rabbits. So picture this. You are Rachel Reeves. The OBR has just told you the financial situation is actually not that terrible. Maybe even, dare we say it, manageable? But you have been banging on about this massive £22 billion black hole for weeks. You have been using it to justify some rather unpopular tax decisions. What do? Well, according to critics, you keep citing that black hole anyway. Because why let a good crisis narrative go to waste, especially when you have already committed to raising £40 billion in taxes? The accusations being thrown around are not exactly subtle either. Senior Conservatives have been having an absolute field day with this. Party leader Kimi Badenoch has stated that Reeves gave an overly pessimistic impression of public finances as a smokescreen to raise taxes. But she did not stop there. Oh no. She went the full distance and said the Chancellor had lied to the public. That is parliamentary speak for, "I think you are a massive fibber," except said whilst wearing a nice suit in the House of Commons. Now you might be wondering where the Financial Conduct Authority stands on all this. After all, if there were dodgy dealings with pre-budget briefings, surely they would want to investigate? Well, on December 4th, the FCA essentially said not our circus, not our monkeys. They declined an immediate investigation, stating they would await the Treasury's internal inquiry into leaks. An internal inquiry. That is right. They are investigating themselves. What could possibly go wrong? It is like asking a fox to investigate who has been eating all the chickens in the hen house. I am sure they will be absolutely rigorous and unbiased. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has been playing the role of loyal teammate, coming to Reeves's defense with the enthusiasm of someone who really does not want his Chancellor to resign. He has insisted there was no misleading and that Reeves had been upfront about the need for tough decisions to build fiscal headroom. On December 1st, he gave a speech calling the budget a moment of personal pride, highlighting achievements like lifting children out of poverty and raising the minimum wage. All very admirable stuff, though it does rather sidestep the question of whether the financial situation was accurately portrayed in the first place. And what does Rachel Reeves herself have to say about all this? Well, she has denied lying, which is precisely what you would expect someone to say whether they were lying or not. It is rather like asking someone if they are a good driver. Nobody ever admits they are terrible. She states she does not accept the accusations and that OBR figures still showed limited room for maneuver, which is technically different from saying there was a massive black hole that required immediate crisis measures. But there we are. The petition's growth tells us something rather important about public sentiment right now. People are not happy. And when people are not happy about taxes, they tend to be particularly vocal about it. The comments on the petition are rather illuminating. Take Diane from Walsall, who wrote on December 8th, discussing how the British people have been lied to. We need a government we can trust. Short, sharp, and expressing a sentiment that probably resonates with quite a few folks right now. Because here is a fundamental issue at the heart of all this: trust. When you are asking people to pay more taxes, to tighten their belts, to accept reduced public services, you need them to trust that you are being honest about why. You need them to believe that these measures are genuinely necessary, not just politically convenient. And when reports emerge suggesting you might have exaggerated the severity of the situation, well, that trust evaporates faster than water on a hot pavement. The timing of all this could not be worse for the government either. We are heading into 2025 with those tax rises about to kick in properly. Employers are looking at increased national insurance contributions. People are eyeing their investments nervously thanks to capital gains tax changes. And now there's this nagging question hanging over everything. Were these measures actually necessary, or were we sold a pup? What makes this particularly fascinating from a political standpoint is how it plays into broader narratives about government competence and honesty. Labour came into power promising to be different, to restore trust in politics, to be straight with the British people. That was rather a big part of their pitch. So having their Chancellor accused of potentially misleading the public about finances within months of taking office is not exactly the story they wanted to be telling. The opposition, naturally, is having the time of their lives with this. They get to stand up in Parliament and demand answers, to call for investigations, to paint themselves as the defenders of truth and transparency. Never mind that every government in history has probably massaged the figures a bit when it suited them. This is politics, and in politics, hypocrisy is a currency more reliable than sterling. But stepping back from the partisan mudslinging for a moment, there's a legitimate question here about transparency in budget processes. Should chancellors be required to disclose when the OBR gives them more positive assessments? Should there be clearer rules about how fiscal headroom is communicated to the public? These are not trivial questions. They go to the heart of how democracy functions when it comes to economic policy. The 4,000 to 4,000 people who have signed that petition are not just expressing anger at one politician. They are expressing frustration with a system where they feel they are not getting the full picture, where decisions that affect their daily lives, their businesses, their families, are being made based on information that might not be entirely accurate. And whether or not Rachel Reeves actually did anything wrong, the perception that she might have is doing serious damage. So where does this leave us? Well, Rachel Reeves is still Chancellor, at least for now. The petition continues to grow. The Treasury's internal inquiry plods along at whatever pace internal inquiries plod. The opposition continues to demand her resignation. The Prime Minister continues to defend her. And the British public watches this whole spectacle whilst their tax bills increase and their trust in politicians decreases. The real test will come in the months ahead as those budget measures take effect. If the economy responds well, if public services improve, if people feel like the pain was worth it, then perhaps this will blow over.